Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for having me here today. I'm going to be looking at, as Lisa said, farm technology and how it can be used really to mitigate some environmental risks. And because of the work that I'm doing with the OCCI, the Olds College Center for Innovation, and the Olds College Smart Farm, that work centers around drones or remotely piloted aircraft systems. And so that's what I'm going to be mostly focusing on today, is those technologies, how we are using them here at Olds College and on our smart farm, and how they can be used elsewhere as well. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of an introduction to the Olds College Smart Farm and the Olds College Center for Innovation. And then we're going to look at those different technologies and how they can be implemented to help mitigate environmental risk. Then I'll talk a little bit about the funding that is available from CAP for this specific type of technology, and then questions and answers afterwards if you have any. But like Lisa said, feel free to interrupt me. Put a question in chat, and Lisa will let me know if there's one there that I can address as we go through. I don't want you to forget your questions by the time we get to the end if you've got some that come up. So Olds College has an actual operating farm. We've had it for quite a few years. Olds College, as you can see up in the logo up here at the top, it was established in 1913 as an agricultural college here in Alberta, and so we've been really operating a farm since then as part of our work here. We try to operate it as close to a commercial farm as possible, but it also serves other purposes. So because we do teach agriculture here as well, it is a living lab for many of our students. And then we also get involved in research and innovation on the farm. So what you see actually here on the right-hand side is our autonomous power platform with a variable rate seeder attached to it. So that's one of the things that we are researching right now, is this autonomous power platform and different implements that can be attached to it. So it runs basically on its own with GPS. You just program it, and away it goes. So we're not going to be focusing on that, although it will come up. I'll show you later on how that integrates with some of the work that we're doing on the drone side and with our sensors there. So we have presently about 2,800 acres. And they're spread out in different locations across Alberta. It's not just here on campus. So we've got some here, but then we've got some by west of Carstairs, west of Didsbury, and then east closer to Trochu, Three Hills area there. And it's been growing. We've been adding land. We also have several partners that we work with, including Carlson Farm. So I mean, I think that adds another like 10,000 acres or so that we do work on as part of the Olds College Smart Farm. And besides grain operations, we also have a cow-calf herd. We've got our own little feedlot, and we also have a sheep flock with a big llama that acts as the protector for that. So we've got 1,117 acres right here on campus. We've got some more across the way from, just across from us on the other side of Highway 2, and then by Carstairs and Didsbury. So 600 plus of that is in field crop as well at the development center in Lacombe. So this was just a recent addition to the Olds College Smart Farm. The Lacombe Research Center there was brought under our wing quite recently. We also have the Olds College Center for Innovation. So it is a separate entity, but it does get involved with smart farm as well. So the purpose of that is it's a research center where we're looking at accelerating the development and adoption of technology and practices. So, and that's really where I get involved. But like I say, a lot of what I do is actually on our smart farm land. So we do research into livestock production, crop and turf production. So turf grass for including golf courses and playing fields, and that we do some research there, but most of it is around different kinds of crops. Environmental stewardship, which I'll talk about a little bit as well later on. We also have our own brewery here on campus, and so we're doing some research into that. And then a lot goes into technology integration. So all kinds of different technologies beyond what we'll talk about today being integrated into the farm equipment and farm operations here. So some of our focuses are on automation. This is actually a picture of me this past summer with one of our drones. So we focus on automation, autonomous equipment, like I mentioned, that autonomous power platform, remote sensing, which is what we do with the drones, as well as with satellite imagery, data collection, management, utilization. So, as an example, with these drones, we're collecting data, and then it's not just good enough to collect it. It's great to have lots of data, but actually managing it and then making use of it is where the value actually comes into all of that data. We also use a bunch of different kinds of sensors on our drones, but also in the soil, crop sensors, climate, etc. Research on regenerative agriculture practices, and I'll talk about one of those a little bit later on here. And then as well, technology development and validation. So as an example, that autonomous power platform is from Raven Technologies. And so we are, I believe, the only post-secondary institution in North America that has one. And we work with Raven, the company that manufactures it, to improve its operation and validate what all is being done with it. So what I'm going to talk about, like I said, is remotely piloted aircraft systems specifically. And so to give you an idea, first of all, of what they actually are, there are a wide variety of different drones or RPAS systems out there. They can kind of be broken down into these categories. So we have a quadcopter, probably the most common, lots of them out there for recreational use, and that a lot of people don't realize that they also serve purposes beyond just taking pictures and videos of people in a park or at the beach or whatever the case may be. So they are very common, very easy to come by. Then there are Hex Copters, like this one here. This is one of ours, which typically the benefit of that over the quadcopters is longer flight times and being able to carry heavier payloads. Fixed wing ones, this is another one that we use here. So very different than the rotor type. Obviously, it flies more like an airplane. Again, it can fly in more adverse weather conditions, and it also stays up a lot longer because it doesn't have to put all its energy into lifting. The wings provide the lift. So there's pros and cons to each type. And then you get into the really advanced ones. This particular one here, SATE out of Calgary, comes and flies this one on our land because they're doing research with this drone and not so great to fly it in the city of Calgary, so they use our land quite a bit for this one. It is actually, as you can see, it looks like a little helicopter. It's hard to tell, but there's actually two rotors on it. They're cantilevered, so the other one is at a different angle here. You can see the tip of it at the beginning of this this image here. And so the benefit of this is heavy lift. This can carry up to 50 kilograms. So they're doing research with things like using it for spraying, ground penetrating radar, different things like that. And obviously the price goes way up. I think this one is like $600,000 or something like that. And the training to fly it is quite extensive, whereas these other ones are a lot simpler. So as far as the main equipment on these, obviously you have some kind of a propulsion system. Then you have to have fuel. So most common is battery. That last one that I showed you there is actually a mini jet engine on there. So it's using jet fuel. And one that's catching on quite a bit now is also hydrogen fuel cell drones are taking off. No pun intended there. A global positioning system, which is very important with the work that we're doing. And so, you know, the drone knows exactly where it is, and that plays into the type of data that you can actually get out of it once you've flown a mission. And then some kind of a camera or sensor or both in some cases. We have, as an example, we have one unit that has a regular RGB camera and a thermal sensor on it, and they're co-aligned, so the resulting images match up with each other. And then you can also, like I said, do some other types of payloads. So we work with one company that's actually using drones to seed overly wet areas, to try to keep down invasive species, to spray fertilizer and just spot locations, etc. Those can be mounted on some of the heavier lift drones and utilized as well. So the simplest type of sensor or camera is just a regular RGB camera, and you know, a lot of drones come with that as a standard add-on to the drone. Again, like I said, for our purposes, we're not using it just to, you know, take pictures and video of the farm equipment, although we do that for multimedia and purposes and marketing purposes. But our main goal with this, when it comes to farming, is to create what are called color orthomosaics. So that's a aerial image, basically, of our fields. We can also create digital surface models from that, and then volumes. And I'll go through these cameras and sensors that we have first, and then I'll show you what actually they produce. So just some examples of what these RGB cameras look like. Here's a Mavic Mini. We use this one occasionally, very small. This one doesn't even require you to have pilot certification to fly it, because it's under 250 grams in weight. So anybody can just pick this thing up and fly it. And it's got a little camera in front. It actually takes pretty good pictures, and we can use it for mapping missions. And then here's one that we attached to one of our bigger drones. And so it's a more professional type of camera on there. Then multi-spectral camera is another type that is becoming very common in agriculture. And we use this for monitoring the health of the vegetation in our crops and also in our pastures. So here's some examples of what one of those might look like. This is the one that we use, but there's other ones out there as well. As you can see, they have more than one lens. So both of these have 5 lenses. They're just configured a little bit differently. This one, the one that we use, has an RGB lens, so it takes a color picture. But then the other 4 are different narrow bands of electromagnetic spectrum. So what that allows us to do, as you'll see later on, is to see things that we can't see with our human eyes in the crops, and that helps us to monitor the health of the crop then. Like I said, we also have a thermal camera, so we use that to measure soil and canopy temperatures in our crops. So again, there's a different variety of those that you can get. This one here is just straight thermal. This is the one that we use that has an RGB and a thermal combined into one unit. There's also something called LiDAR, which uses lasers to measure rather than just doing it off of an RGB image. And from that, we can create digital terrain models and also do volumes. This stands for light detection and ranging. And so it's a more expensive technology. One of the research projects that we did this last summer was to see if this gave us better results than just back up here to the digital surface models from just an RGB camera. And we found there was really a negligible difference in the surface models that were created. And you, like I say, obviously much cheaper technology on the RGB side than having to go all the way to LiDAR. The one benefit of LiDAR is that it actually creates what's called digital terrain model instead of a digital surface model. So you can use it in areas where, say, you have trees, or even with your crop before it the canopy fills in, and it will interpolate an actual ground surface or terrain rather than just the top surface of the crop or the the height of the trees. So you can use it, like I say, to actually create a true ground surface rather than just the top surface of whatever it is that is out there that you're flying over. Something that's starting to gain popularity are multi-gas detectors, and I saw just yesterday some of the stuff coming out of COP26, where we are trying to commit to monitoring more of our methane output, not just from oil and gas, but also from agriculture. And so this is, like I say, something that's becoming more popular. There's different kinds. There are some that are just dedicated to methane. So that this yellow one here is an example of that. And then there are other ones that can detect other greenhouse gas emissions as well. We are hoping to get into this on our smart farm. We haven't gotten one of these yet. And one of the reasons why is that they haven't been sensitive enough to detect changes in gas levels, say over a field when you put manure down, or when when you're done harvesting, etc. They haven't been sensitive enough, but now the newer ones that are coming out are supposed to be able to measure that small change level there and actually be able to quantify how much is being released. And then the other one that we have thought of, another way of using this, is actually over our feedlot to measure methane emissions from our feedlots. And that has, there's been some studies done already that show promise in that, being able to measure and quantify that. Yeah, and then one that just...
Sorry to interrupt. I'm just curious, this is a question for me. How are those used then? So they're just placed over the field or over the feedlot, and it measures over time, or? You fly
over the feedlot with the drone, and it is picking up readings as it flies over the feedlot, and then the processing afterwards generates an image for you of the different levels, but then it also gives you the volumes.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So last one here that I'll mention is electromagnetic conductivity sensor. This is really leading edge, I guess. So this is used to measure soil moisture and salinity. These have been around for a long time in different forms. So what's new, like when I say bleeding edge, is to hang it off a drone and actually fly it over the field rather than pulling it behind a tractor or walking a field manually. So we just started experimenting with this past summer, and we're working with Geonics, a manufacturer out of Mississauga. It's actually, if you look at this, these are actually strings hanging off of the drone. So like I say, this is really bleeding edge. Some very scary situations this past summer with this. Yeah, because not only do you have to hang this somehow, and because it's not made for a drone, there isn't a proper mount for it, but you also have to fly very close to the ground. So it makes for some very challenging situations there. It's heavier than most of the other types of sensors that we use. But the benefit, if we can get this to work, and if they produce maybe one that's lighter and actually has a solid mount to put on a drone, the benefit would be that you can then, as a farmer, you can actually do your testing while the field is wet, where you can't get into maybe with your tractor or with walking even in some cases. So you can also fly over areas where there is a high moisture, and maybe you're not even planting in there, but you want to be able to measure the salinity in a low spot. As well, then because it's mounted on a drone, you don't have any compaction happening as you use this. So typically the way they're used now, like I say, is either behind a tractor or a quad, and you go back and forth across the field and dragging this thing behind you, and it's just measuring continually there. I see there's a couple of questions that have come up.
Yeah. So the first one is more of a comment. So it might be interesting to measure methane and other gases downstream from the prevailing wind or a feedlot or manure spread.
Yeah.
And then the second one, this isn't a technology question so much, but with respect to methane, is Old College testing red seaweed supplementation or other feed additives to reduce methane emissions?
We are doing some. I'm not as involved in that, but I know Sean Thompson, the director of our Livestock Technology Access Center, was telling me that they are experimenting with some different feeds. Feed combinations and additives for methane emissions. So that is something like I say, I don't know the details of that, but that is one of the other research projects that's going on the livestock side.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so what are these actual sensors and cameras that we can mount on our drones? What do they actually do for us? So like I mentioned, with just a regular camera, and remember this is out of the box with a lot of drones out there, we can create this RGB or color orthomosaic, and then we can also create a digital surface model. So this is an example of just an edge of one of our fields here. We flew this before the crop started growing so that we had an actual terrain model, even though technically that's not the word for these. But yeah, this is bare ground here. So we didn't have to use LiDAR to get that. You can see we've got a water feature running along here. And so this image here is actually made up of many individual photos that the drone takes. So it's not just one photo. It flies back and forth, takes literally hundreds of pictures, and then the processing software stitches them together into one final image for us. So right off the bat, when we started doing this, we realized, wow, you get a completely different perspective of your field from the air than when you're standing at the edge of it or standing in the box of your truck looking across the field. We saw things that we'd never noticed before. So that was a huge benefit. But we can take that further. So we can create what's called the digital surface model. So these colors represent the elevations. So you can see, this is where that water feature is going through, and it goes much lower over in this area here. So that then is potential for some runoff from our spraying of the field and that ending up in this water course. And this one eventually leads down to a dam around, I think it's around Linden. I can't remember the name of it. There's a reservoir there, which this all eventually feeds into. So obviously we don't want, to be overloading that with chemicals from our fields. So besides then, once we have this digital surface model, we can look at the slope. So this is actually a slope image of that same area, and the colors represent the percent slope. So you can see we've got fairly flat area in here, and you can tell as it gets closer to the edge, we're starting to see increased slope. So what we did with that then was, one more thing. We can also then automatically generate contours, and this just confirms, the other images. As the contour lines get closer together, we're obviously getting a steeper slope there. So more potential for runoff in that. So what we did then was to take that and actually retrace our field boundary to provide a buffer, a larger buffer, so that we don't have as much potential for chemical runoff, nutrient overloading into the waterway there. This is all done. This is where I mentioned that GPS is very important on these. So this is all GPSed automatically from the drone, because the drone has GPS on it. So we can actually take this new boundary that we drew and put it into our phones or into more precise GPS equipment and go out there and stake out what this new edge of the field should be, so that that would be kind of the manual way of doing it. With us, because we have GPS on all of our equipment, we actually just take the new field boundary and upload it into our equipment, and it does it for the seeding. And as an example, it doesn't seed in the area that we were previously seeding. So this is the new boundary. We're staying further away from the waterway, decreasing the risk of runoff entering into that waterway, and increasing the buffer width there. And like I say, we take what we drew here, we take that and just upload it into our GPS equipment, and it's all automated. Worst case scenario, you upload it into something like a phone. It's not as accurate, but you could actually then walk to this location with your phone and stake that out. So I see somebody asked, you could upload it into equipment. So, I think I answered that question. Do you recall how many acres were offset? Sorry, I don't off the top of my head. But we could again easily figure that out just by taking the old field boundary and subtracting this from it, and seeing what the difference was. So that's, again, just from a regular RGB camera. You don't have to have any other special equipment on your drones to be able to generate these, a complete single aerial photograph of your field that is GPS. It's got its proper coordinates. You can take measurements off of it, all that kind of stuff. And then you can also create this digital surface model. If you're interested in the technical details of how that actually gets created, I can maybe talk about that after we're done here. The other thing that we can, so what we learned from this, like I said, a visual inspection tool. Very good. Doesn't matter whether we're talking before the crop is in or after the crop is grown. We often just pop a drone up into the air and fly over our fields to have a look at what's going on. This year, we do a lot of research plots. You saw maybe at the beginning, one of the beginning slides had pictures of small rectangles of different crops. So we're doing that for some of our research And then we move those around, and as we move them, then the next year that area might get planted just as a regular field. So this year we actually noticed that where we had some research plots last year, the crop that is in there now as a regular field has been greatly affected by the location of those research plots, something that we wouldn't have noticed just from standing at the edge of the field and looking at it. So that was again, another just aha moment for us, and realization that, wow, a cheap little drone can actually be a very important tool for your farm. So we accurately identify slopes and potential problematic runoff locations from this. And so that helps us then to redefine field boundaries and create those protective buffers around water features and wetland areas. The other thing we can do off of that is also generate volumes. So we have, like I said, we have a feedlot. We also have quite a few horses because we have an equine program. And so every year, obviously, we muck out all those pens and the feedlot and pile our manure into piles. And so from that drone, we can actually generate accurate volumes of how much manure is in each of those piles. The way that then we use this is to know for sure how much volume we have, and then to then plan the disposal of that manure. And so one of the things we did this past year was to more efficiently plan out the distribution of the manure on our fields. So we spread it on several different fields. We were actually able to coordinate the dump trucks more easily to the fields and make sure that we're, again, this might not be a big deal, but every little bit helps. So we were using less fuel by being very efficient in how we took the manure to the fields. And then also we were able to calculate how much, like which pile should go to which field, and avoid overloading those fields with the manure and nutrient overload from that. So again, without any other special equipment other than a drone with a regular camera, we were able to do that. When we get into the multi-spectral cameras, then we can start doing vegetative health monitoring. So this is one of our fields. The colors on here indicate basically the health of the crop, the red being unhealthy up to the green being very, very healthy. Oftentimes red will let you know where there's bare ground, rocks, that kind of stuff in your field that doesn't have any associated biomass to it. So what we do with this then is to create a prescription map for our variable rate sprayers. So take this image, run it through some analysis, and generate these zones. And then this gets uploaded into the spraying equipment, and we have a variable rate sprayer. And so nozzles turn on and off as it goes across the field to not apply the full amount of fertilizer. We also use it for fungicide and desiccant as well, just modified what we're looking at for those. So we're detecting health in the plants. We're using it to create that variable rate fertilizer application zones to go into the sprayers, and we can upload those into our system. And so then we're reducing the amount of chemical inputs rather than just putting the same amount over the entire field. We're being very selective in how much we put on there, in what areas. So downstream from that, then runoff, all that kind of stuff is improved as we reduce the amount that we're putting on our fields, as well as we save money.
George?
Yes.
There's just one quick question. What is the name of the Nbbi camera?
Oh,
which model?
So we'll come to that in a minute, but the one we used was Parrot Sequoia. Yeah, and I should mention, I don't know, maybe you guys are familiar with what Nbbi means. That's Normalized Difference Vegetation Index is what that stands for. And it's just measuring the health or biomass of the plants. We use other indices as well, like I mentioned, for other purposes. So this one we use for fertilizer spraying, but for an example, desiccant at the end of the season when we're trying to get ready to harvest, we use a different one called NDRE, which is Normalized Difference Red Edge. And then we use a PSRI. Oh, I can't remember what the P stands for or the R, but S is senescence and I is index. So fortunately, I just have to generate these images and somebody else goes and does whatever they need to do with them. So they just tell me what I need to do and I give them to them. And obviously my curiosity makes me ask what they're using it for and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I will show you some of, later on, the names of different things and also just ballpark pricing. So another way that we use the multi-spectral camera is for our rotational grazing. And this has quite a few implications, I guess. So this is basically the same type of image. I've just put in different labels here. So red is bare soil and rocks, up to the green being high biomass. So this is one of our experimental fields where we've been doing this now for a couple of years to show ranchers in our area the benefits of rotational grazing versus free grazing. So we took the north half of the field here and divided it up into 8 paddocks, and then the lower half here we just allowed half the herd in there to do free grazing. So this image was taken June 26th, and then we did another one July 10th. You can see quite a difference in there. So that's basically 2 weeks later. And so besides then just looking at these 2 images, we also do what's called change detection on that. And we can see where our biomass has decreased and where it's increased in the different paddocks. And that helps us then to plan the rotation of the cattle through here. And I say, it's kind of multifaceted because there's many, I guess, benefits to this over just, the rotational grazing part, or sorry, the movement of the cattle. Using rotational grazing versus free grazing, we've been able to show is much better for the environment. As you can see here, if you look at the free grazing, see a lot more red in there. So it's in areas it's being overgrazed. And so, you'll see a lot of bare soil in this down here. Whereas even though, as an example, this one and here, and so 2 and 6 look pretty red. I don't have the image, but we moved them out of there. So this is basically, they've been in 2 and 6 at this point, 2 and 6 and 8. And this was done just before we moved them now to their next rotation. And so we did another one July 17th, and you can see how 2, 6, and 8 bounce back, whereas obviously with the free grazing, it just keeps getting worse. So,
George, can I interrupt for a second? There's a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, George, I find that one particularly interesting. I wondered if you said you'd been doing that at that site for 3 years or so. Have you come upon a situation where, say, the rancher's eyes or the researcher's eyes tell you one thing in these different paddocks, and the analysis tells you something different? Have you actually, come up where you didn't see something with your eyes that this showed you?
Yeah, and that was one of the points I was going to make in the next slide. But yes, so this gives us a very objective data to plan our movement. And these are actually pretty small. In some cases, you'd have larger ones. It's pretty hard to walk the entire paddock or all of them and kind of take in everything and decide how you're going to move your cattle around it here. Whereas, like I say, this is very objective, gives us a snapshot of the entire area at one time. And yeah, it definitely allows us to see, oh, well, maybe this is getting a little more grazed than what we thought it was. So maybe it's time to move them. Or we look at one and we go, well, it looks like we can maybe leave the cows on here for another day. Whereas, you're out there and you're thinking maybe like I say, you're typically only looking at different spots in there rather than getting a view of the whole thing. The resolution of these images, these are much higher than we actually need to have. I think it's about a 10 centimeter resolution per pixel. And well, that's one of the things we've discovered with these is that, you can get too much of a good thing. We use that resolution because we have it, but it's not required. We did another project that I don't talk about here, but for doing yield predictions on both a forage crop and also on a barley crop. And we compared drone imagery to satellite imagery. So again, we had 5 to 10 centimeter resolution with the drones, and whereas satellite imagery was more like 10-meter resolution, and the ability to predict the yield was negligible between those two different resolutions. Did somebody have another question?
Yeah, I just I guess it's not directly related. Thank you for the explanation. Does it make any difference at all with these types of shots and analysis? What time of day, temperature, humidity, does any of that come into play with creating variability in the results you see, or is it fairly independent of those variables?
It depends on the sensor that you're using. The one that we use has is radiometrically calibrated every time we fly. So we can fly it at different times of day, cloudy or bright sunlight, and we should get fairly consistent results. It does have to, this is based on reflectance, so you can't fly it at night. With these thermal ones, you can fly anytime. But with these, it would have to be daylight. And like I say, if you've got a sensor that's radiometrically calibrated, which most of them are now. So basically what that means is you have a target that you lay out on the ground, and you hold the drone over it with the camera and take some shots of that before you fly, and then it adjusts all of the values based on that. If it's a day where there's a mix of sunlight and cloud continually, then it's going to mess things up. But so yeah, I guess long answer to your question. You're better to fly either in full sunlight or full overcast. Like I say, if there's clouds moving across the sky, it is going to make some differences. But the time of day or the moisture in the air, that kind of stuff doesn't matter. By the way, in case you're interested, so that the yield prediction one, like I don't have any information in here on it, but I mentioned it. We were able to predict within about 4% of the actual yield, which we thought was pretty amazing. And like I say, using drone imagery versus satellite imagery, the difference in the predictions were pretty negligible there. The benefit to drones over satellites is that you can fly closer to your harvest date. So with satellite imagery, you're typically anywhere from 3 days for between passes to some of the satellites, depending on which ones you're using, are more like 2 weeks between passes. So you might not get a flyover of the satellite close to your actual harvest date. Obviously, as well, with satellites, if there's cloud cover, you're shot. So with drone, you can fly it anytime. With that fixed wing, you can even fly it in light rain. And so you're not, you can fly it the day before you're going to harvest and then decide what you're going to do based on that. But if you do have, clear sunny day and the satellite goes over close to your harvest time, then like I say, the difference in predictions is pretty negligible. I guess the other benefit to drones is it's easier for people to get that data because you can have your own drone than to figure out how to get the data from the satellites. Some of those satellite companies actually charge a fair bit for their imagery. So with this, we're able to identify available biomass for grazing. So even before we put the cattle on there, we're able to, kind of figure out, okay, what size of a herd should we put on here? We're able to be very objective about the timing of our rotations. So that allows us to then avoid overgrazing. So environmentally speaking, we're protecting the root systems of the plants. We are also then cutting down on wind and water erosion. And in the case of, where there's bare soil and then it rains, hummocking and pugging from the cattle there, because basically we don't end up with any bare ground in those areas, in the rotational areas. Thermal imagery. So this gives us, we actually do this at different times. This one is over a bare field before the crop comes up, and it's giving us soil temperatures. And you can see there in degrees Celsius, quite a range here from, just barely above freezing to 37 degrees. Again, this thermal camera that we have is radiometrically calibrated, like our multi-spectral camera. So these are accurate surface temperatures. And we use this for soil moisture, as well as when the crop is up, we use it for canopy temperatures in part of our research there. So in this case, one of the interesting things that this showed us, we flew this, we saw the moisture in the field, we saw this stripe running off here to the east. That is a spot that has been problematic for us for erosion. From the digital surface model and the contours, it's not really obvious. So being able to see it then clearly with the thermal camera, we realized, okay, yeah, there's definitely, that's where the runoff is going, and that's why we're getting erosion there, and it allowed us to then change our tactics to try to minimize the erosion potential in that area. So we also use it once we've identified the moisture in the soils. Before we do that with the bare soil before the crop is planted, that becomes an input then into our variable rate seeder. So it helps us to be able to identify areas where we can increase the seed rate and areas where we should probably decrease it. So we avoid overstressing the soil. We also get better harvests, better crop. And then, like I just mentioned, we can identify potential water erosion locations that maybe aren't as obvious from something like the digital surface model or the contours. This, I said that it's an input layer because we do more than just the soil moisture analysis for deciding our variable rate seeding. We also put in data from previous years on yield data. We have soil sensors actually out in the field, in this particular field as well, that are measuring all kinds of other other things that we also use then to determine our variable rate seeding. I saw a question there.
Yeah, so it says, have you implemented cattle ID ear tags with remote sensors, readers, and feedlot or pasture situations?
We have debated that. We were actually thinking of using a drone with a RF reader on it, but we found that it takes a lot of work to get the cattle accustomed to a drone. Otherwise, they just get scared and they start running. If you come down close enough to actually be able to read the tags. But with one of our partners that we're working with, we put readers by the gates and by the troughs. And it's actually an elk herd. And so they want, they were finding that getting out there and actually counting them was an issue because elk don't like to have much human contact. So this allowed them to monitor that much easier. We've also, there's a Thompson Rivers University in the Okanagan area. We have communications with them. They are using a high-res zoom camera with thermal. And so what they are doing then, they're finding that they're able to, and they're on open range. So they're experimenting with this for open range ranching, where cattle might be out in the bush somewhere. So the thermal allows them to spot them easily, and then the zoom allows them to zoom in on the ear tag and be able to read the tag and they're up high. They don't have to fly down low. They're up, 100 meters. Cattle don't even know they're there. Obviously, if they're hiding in thick trees, the thermal will still pick them out, but they won't be able to read the ear tags. But so hopefully that answers your question, gives you some other ideas of what can be done there. So with the potential for water erosion locations, that helped us to then plan how we're going to reshape that field surface to try to minimize erosion. One other technology has nothing to do with drones, but something that we've been researching, and I just wanted to mention because it really has big implications for water quality, is floating islands. So using floating islands to remove nutrients from source water. So we're doing a multi-year research project on this. We've gone through phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 was completely inside of a greenhouse with tanks and these floating islands with plants, and we were, adding the chemicals in that to the tanks and measuring that way. Phase 2, we actually used water from our own feedlot in the tanks, and that was just completed. So we found, as an example, with that, 84% of phosphorus was removed from the water, 45% of potassium from our own feedlot in those tanks. And now we're starting phase 3, which will be actually out in, we've got 4 different farms, 4 different feedlots where we're actually putting these floating islands into these storage ponds. So like I say, this has major implications, I think, really promising results. We have a full report, if you're interested in it, on our phase 2, and I can give you the link for that, and also a webinar that we just did recently that explained what we've been going through there and some of the different plants that we're finding that work very well for this. So this is a completely, environmentally safe way of cleaning water, no chemicals. And it has, potential, like we're doing it specifically for feedlot storage ponds, but it has potential for sloughs, for for even sewage lagoons, all that kind of stuff. It's really interesting to see this developing here. So back to the drones here. We put it all together. Basically what we need is a drone. many different varieties out there, everything from DJI Mavic Mini, which is that little one that I showed you a picture of, that you don't even need a pilot certificate for. And that's like $600. All the way up to some more expensive ones. The SenseFly is that fixed wing one that we have. We also have other Phantoms and a Matrice. I highlighted this Phantom P4 multispectral. We don't have one of these, but it looks very promising. It's a complete system basically in itself, and I think it runs under $10,000 for this. I should mention, by the way, that a lot of this, you know, for smaller farms, they maybe are not going to do this themselves, but there's more and more service providers out there that can do this kind of work for farmers and give them the results. So budget-wise for your drone, you know, the Mavic Mini I said was around under 600. There's knockoffs that are even cheaper. So anywhere from, you know, 3,000 to 14,000, depending on what all you want on that. Then you need a camera or some kind of sensor. The multispectral ones that are very common are the MicaSense and Parrot Sequoia. Parrot Sequoia is the one that we use. And again, there's other varieties available. In some cases, they are included with the drone. So most of the drones come with an RGB camera, as an example. This Phantom P4 multispectral has the multispectral camera included with it. So, you know, depending on what you want to do, it could be your price for $300. You get the drone and a RGB camera, and you can do your surface models, your drainage analysis, that kind of stuff, just all for that $300 price. Or some of the more expensive, like the thermal camera that we have that includes an RGB with it, is around $17,000. So they can get pretty pricey. Then you need some kind of imaging processing software to take the images from the drone and process them into something usable. Probably the two most common ones out there are Pix4D Fields and Drone Deploy. And for, again, if you're not a service provider, if you're doing this for your own farm, you may only need to do this, you know, 2 times a year or something like that. So rather than having to buy the software, you can actually get a monthly subscription for it, around $200, or to buy it outright, maybe around $3,500. And then some kind of display and analysis software to allow you to work with the images once they're finished. Depending on what you want to do, this functionality might actually be included. So as an example, Pix4D Fields works with the multispectral cameras and produces the prescription maps for a variable rate sprayer, all within the Pix4D Fields software. If you want to get more advanced and you want to actually combine different layers together and do other kinds of analysis, then you can go to something like Qgis, which is free. It's an open source GIS software, very powerful. We use it, and allows us to do all the type of analysis. And the other great thing about it is that there's lots of tutorials online to learn how to use it. So all that, you know, is basically what you need for a complete system. Like I said, many, well, I won't say many, but there's several service providers out there that are offering this type of service to farms, and some of the bigger farms are doing this themselves. As far as then the CAP funding, if you look under their farm technology funding list, they've got optical sensors, and one of the ones listed under there is the vegetative index data, and that's your multispectral cameras. Then they also have a category for technologically innovative and technology that is beyond a research stage and is commercially available and successfully demonstrated to work in Alberta. So drones are becoming very common on farms, no matter what purpose you have for them. You know, even to the point of just, like I say, popping them up in a field to have a look at what's happening from an overhead view, which doesn't require any extra processing software or analysis software. And then I would argue that the processing software also fits into this category. Both that Pix4D fields that I mentioned and Drone Deploy are targeted specifically at agricultural industry. So, if a farmer is interested in doing something like this, I would argue that definitely they should be able to get some CAP funding for this.